She thought the business trip would save their marriage. Instead, it ended 3 lives. When Sarah Chen kissed her husband goodbye that Friday morning in September, she had no idea she would be dead within 48 hours. She stood in their suburban Portland driveway, her rolling suitcase at her feet, watching Marcus load her laptop bag into her car. The early autumn air was crisp, the kind of morning that smelled like possibility. Marcus smiled at her, that familiar crooked smile that had first attracted her to him 9 years ago at a mutual friend's barbecue. He was handsome in a weathered way, with dark hair graying at the temples and eyes that had seen too much but still crinkled when he laughed. "Drive safe," he said, pulling her close. "Text me when you get there." She nodded against his chest, breathing in his cologne. Old Spice and coffee, the scent of home. "It's just 2 nights. I'll be back Sunday evening." "I know," he said. "I just worry." She pulled back and looked at him, really looked at him, at the lines around his eyes that had deepened in the year since he'd retired from the Portland Police Bureau, at the tension he carried in his shoulders even when he was trying to relax. Marcus had always been intense, focused, the kind of cop who brought his cases home with him. But retirement hadn't softened him the way she'd hoped. If anything, it had made him more vigilant, more watchful. He monitored her comings and goings with the same attention he used to give crime scenes. "I'll be fine," she said, kissing him once more. "It's just a pharmaceutical sales conference. Boring PowerPoints and hotel coffee." He laughed, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Call me tonight?" "Of course." She got in her car and backed out of the driveway, waving once before turning onto their tree-lined street. In the rearview mirror, she watched Marcus stand there, hands in his pockets, watching her leave. Something about the image made her chest tighten. Guilt, maybe, or prescience. She'd been pulling away from him for months now, creating distance he could feel but couldn't name. The marriage wasn't broken yet, but it was cracking. She could hear it in the silences between them, in the way they moved around each other in the kitchen like roommates instead of lovers. Sarah Chen had built a good life. At 34, she was a regional sales manager for a major pharmaceutical company, pulling in 6 figures and traveling twice a month for conferences and client meetings. She liked her job, liked the autonomy, liked being good at something that didn't involve Marcus's world of crime and violence and the weight of other people's tragedies. She'd grown up in a tight-knit Korean-American family in Seattle, the older of 2 daughters. Her parents had owned a dry cleaning business and worked 70-hour weeks to put both girls through college. Sarah had inherited their work ethic and their optimism, the belief that effort equaled reward. She'd met Marcus at a 4th of July party when she was 25 and he was 32. He was a detective then, working homicide, and she'd been drawn to his quiet confidence, the way he listened more than he talked. He was different from the finance guys and tech bros she usually dated. Marcus was real, solid. He told her on their 3rd date that he'd never been married because the job made relationships impossible. "Cops have the highest divorce rate of any profession," he'd said. "I didn't want to be that statistic." She'd taken it as a challenge. She could be different. They could be different. For the first few years, they were. Marcus was devoted, protective without being possessive. He supported her career, showed up to her work events, cooked dinner when she traveled. They talked about having kids someday, maybe buying a bigger house, maybe getting a dog. But then Marcus's partner was killed during a robbery response, shot 3 times outside a convenience store while Marcus was checking the back entrance. Marcus returned fire, killed the shooter, saved 2 hostages. He was called a hero. He was given commendations, and something inside him shattered. The PTSD crept in slowly, nightmares first, then hypervigilance. He couldn't go to grocery stores without scanning for exits, couldn't watch movies with gunfire, started drinking more, sleeping less. The department mandated therapy, but Marcus went through the motions without engaging. After 18 months of desk duty and psychological evaluations, he took early retirement. He was 42 years old with nowhere to channel the intensity that had defined him. That's when Sarah started noticing the changes, the way he'd check her phone when she was in the shower, the questions about her coworkers, her schedule, her business trips, the subtle accusations wrapped in concern. "You seem distant lately. Is everything okay?" Or, "You didn't mention David would be at this conference. Is there something you're not telling me?" She'd try to reassure him, but reassurance only worked temporarily. The paranoia would return, stronger each time. 3 months ago, Sarah had gone to lunch with an old college friend, a guy named James who was in town for a wedding. Completely innocent. She'd mentioned it to Marcus beforehand, showed him James's Facebook profile, explained the whole thing. But when she got home, Marcus was cold. He'd found her text thread with James, had read messages going back months, friendly messages. casual check-ins, nothing inappropriate. But Marcus had built a narrative around them, convinced himself she was hiding something. They'd fought that night, the kind of fight where you say things you can't take back. Sarah had accused him of being controlling. Marcus had accused her of being unfaithful. She'd slept in the guest room. In the morning, he apologized, said his PTSD was making him irrational. She forgave him because she loved him, because she remembered who he used to be. But something had shifted. She started deleting text messages that were perfectly innocent, just to avoid his suspicion. She stopped mentioning male co-workers. She felt herself becoming smaller, quieter, more careful. Her sister Rachel was the only one who knew how bad things had gotten. Rachel, 29 and working as a dental hygienist, still lived in Seattle near their parents. The sisters talked almost daily, long phone conversations where Sarah could be honest about her struggling marriage. Rachel had never particularly liked Marcus, thought he was too intense, too jealous. But she'd supported Sarah's choice because she wanted her sister to be happy. "You need to either go to couples therapy or leave him," Rachel had said 2 weeks ago during one of their calls. "This isn't sustainable, Sarah. You're walking on eggshells in your own marriage." Sarah had resisted. "He's getting better. He just needs more time to adjust to civilian life." "It's been over a year," Rachel said. "How much more time does he need?" Sarah didn't have an answer. The conference in Seattle was supposed to be routine. 2 days of product presentations, networking events, and strategy meetings. Sarah's company was launching a new diabetes medication, and the regional managers were being briefed on the marketing approach. But Sarah was also looking forward to it for another reason. David Park would be there. David was the East Coast regional manager, Korean-American like her, funny and ambitious and easy to talk to. They'd met at a conference in Chicago 6 months ago and had stayed in touch. Friendly emails and occasional texts about work challenges and industry gossip. Sarah told herself it was just friendship, but she knew it was becoming something more. She looked forward to David's messages more than she should. She thought about him when she shouldn't. She'd never cheated on Marcus, never even come close. But David represented something she'd lost in her marriage. Lightness, ease, the feeling of being seen without being scrutinized. She arrived at the Seattle hotel around noon, checked into her room on the 4th floor, and texted Marcus a photo of the Space Needle from her window. He responded immediately, "Beautiful. Miss you already." She felt the familiar guilt twist in her stomach. Marcus wasn't a bad man. He was a broken man, and she was tired of trying to fix him. That night, she met colleagues in the hotel restaurant. David was there, sitting across from her, telling a story about a disastrous sales pitch in Boston that had everyone laughing. Sarah watched him, the way his hands moved when he talked, the way his eyes lingered on her just a fraction too long. She felt something she hadn't felt in months. Wanted. Interesting. Alive. After dinner, the group migrated to the hotel bar. Sarah nursed a glass of wine and talked with David about their families, their careers, the strange pressure of being children of immigrants who'd sacrificed everything. "My parents still ask when I'm getting promoted," David said. "Like regional manager isn't enough. They want VP, CEO, president of the universe." Sarah laughed. "Mine too. Success is never final for them. There's always another mountain." "Do you ever feel like you're living their dream instead of your own?" David asked. The question landed heavy. Sarah thought about Marcus, about the life she built that looked perfect from the outside but felt hollow inside. "All the time," she said quietly. David held her gaze. Something unspoken passed between them. Sarah stood abruptly. "I should get to bed. Early session tomorrow." "Yeah," David said. "Me too." They rode the elevator in charged silence. Her room was on 4, his was on 7. When the doors opened on her floor, she stepped out and turned back. "Good night, David." "Good night, Sarah." The doors closed. She stood in the empty hallway, heart pounding, knowing she'd just walked away from something dangerous. She went to her room, changed into pajamas, and called Marcus like she'd promised. They talked for 20 minutes about nothing important. He asked about the conference, about her hotel, about whether she'd had dinner alone. "No, I ate with some colleagues," she said, deliberately not mentioning David. "Anyone I know? Just people from other regions. No one you've met." The lie came easily. Too easily. When they hung up, Sarah lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling, wondering when her marriage had become something she had to lie her way through. 200 miles south, Marcus Chen sat in their living room with Sarah's laptop open in front of him. He'd known her password for years. She'd never changed it. He scrolled through her emails, her calendar, her message threads. He wasn't looking for anything specific. He was looking for patterns, absences, gaps that didn't add up. He found David Park's name in her set messages, friendly emails, professional on the surface. But Marcus had interrogated enough suspects to know how people communicated when they were hiding something. The tone was too casual, the inside jokes too familiar. He opened her calendar and saw the Seattle conference. He cross-referenced it with her company's website and found the attendee list. David Park, East Coast Regional Manager, would be presenting Saturday afternoon. Marcus felt his chest tighten. His hands started shaking, the same tremor that had started after the shooting. He closed the laptop and sat in the dark, his mind spinning through scenarios. Sarah laughing with David. Sarah touching David's arm. Sarah in a hotel room that wasn't hers, in a bed that wasn't theirs. He told himself he was being paranoid. His therapist would say this was the PTSD talking, the hypervigilance finding threats where none existed. But Marcus had been a cop for 15 years. He trusted his instincts, and his instincts were screaming. At 2 in the morning, Marcus made a decision. He opened his laptop and booked a room at the same Seattle hotel where Sarah was staying. He packed a small bag, just enough for a weekend, and he reached into the safe in their bedroom closet and pulled out his service weapon, a Glock 22 he never turned in after retirement. He checked the magazine. 15 rounds. He slid it into his bag beneath his clothes. Marcus didn't sleep that night. He sat at the kitchen table, drinking coffee and watching the clock, waiting for morning, waiting to know for certain whether the woman he loved was betraying him, waiting for proof. By dawn, he was calm, focused. He felt like a cop again, working a case. He felt purposeful. He had no idea he was planning a murder. Marcus arrived in Seattle just after 6 on Friday evening. The drive from Portland had taken 3 hours, long enough for his resolve to harden into something cold and methodical. He'd stopped once for gas and coffee, barely tasting either. His mind was running surveillance protocols, the mental checklist he used to use before stakeouts. Observe, document, wait for the target to reveal themselves. Except this time, the target was his wife. He checked into the hotel using a different entrance than the main lobby, avoiding the front desk where Sarah might see him. He'd requested a room on the first floor, strategic positioning that would give him mobility. The room was generic and sterile, identical to 1,000 other hotel rooms. He unpacked methodically, hanging his shirts in the closet, placing his toiletries in the bathroom. The gun stayed in his bag, zipped into the inner pocket. He wasn't planning to use it, he just needed to know it was there. At 7, he positioned himself in a hotel restaurant, a sprawling space with dim lighting and enough alcoves to remain invisible. He ordered a burger he wouldn't eat and a beer he barely touched. Then he waited. His phone was open to a notes app where he'd created a log. Date, time, observations, old habits. Sarah appeared at 7:30 with a group of 5 people, all dressed in business casual, all carrying the relaxed energy of colleagues who'd finished their work obligations for the day. Marcus watched from behind a decorative column, his eyes tracking her movements. She wore a blue dress he recognized, the one she'd bought for her cousin's wedding last summer. Her hair was down, falling past her shoulders the way he liked. She was laughing at something a tall man was saying, her hand briefly touching his arm. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. He zoomed in with his phone camera and took a photo. The tall man was Asian, early 30s, expensive watch, confident posture. Marcus opened Sarah's company website on his phone and scrolled through the leadership page until he found a match. David Park, East Coast Regional Manager, Princeton MBA. Based in New York, Marcus watched them for 90 minutes. The group ordered appetizers and wine, their conversation animated and punctuated with laughter. Sarah seemed lighter than she did at home, more relaxed. She smiled more. Marcus cataloged every interaction between her and David, the way they sat diagonally across from each other, the way David's attention kept returning to her even when others were talking, the way Sarah leaned forward when David spoke, engaged in a way she hadn't been with Marcus in months. Nothing happened, nothing concrete. No hand-holding, no inappropriate touching, no evidence that would hold up in court. But Marcus didn't need courtroom evidence. He needed confirmation of the narrative his instincts were writing, and everything he saw supported it. The body language, the eye contact, the ease between them that spoke of familiarity beyond professional acquaintance. When the group finally dispersed around 9, Marcus followed Sarah to the elevator from a safe distance. She got off on the 4th floor. He noted the floor number and returned to his room, his mind already planning the next day's surveillance. He lay on the bed fully clothed and stared at the ceiling, his thoughts spiraling. He imagined Sarah and David together, imagined conversations he'd never hear, touches he'd never see. The images played like a movie he couldn't stop watching. He didn't sleep. Saturday morning brought a fresh strategy. Marcus positioned himself in the hotel lobby with a newspaper and a clear view of the elevators. Sarah came down at 8:15, dressed for the conference in black slacks and a cream blouse. She was alone. She grabbed coffee from the lobby cafe and disappeared into one of the conference rooms. Marcus waited 30 minutes, then checked the conference schedule posted in the lobby. Morning sessions until noon, lunch break, afternoon breakouts resuming at 2. At noon, Sarah emerged with the same group from last night. They headed toward the restaurant, but David pulled her aside, spoke quietly to her. Marcus watched from behind a display of tourist brochures. Sarah nodded at whatever David said, then told her colleague she'd catch up with them later. She and David walked out the front entrance together. Marcus's pulse quickened. He followed them at a careful distance, his police training kicking in. Stay far enough back to remain invisible. Keep multiple civilians between you and the target. Use reflections in windows to track without direct line of sight. They walked 3 blocks to a coffee shop, ordered drinks, then continued to the waterfront. The Seattle waterfront was crowded with tourists and locals enjoying the September sunshine. Sarah and David found a bench overlooking Puget Sound and sat close together, their coffee cups balanced on the armrest between them. Marcus found a position 50 yards away, partially hidden behind a hot dog cart. He pulled out his phone and switched to video, recording them in short clips. They talked for almost 2 hours. Marcus couldn't hear the conversation, but he didn't need to. He watched David's hand move to Sarah's face, watched her lean into the touch, watched the way she looked at him. It was the way she used to look at Marcus years ago, before his job consumed him, before the shooting, before everything turned dark. Marcus felt something crack inside his chest, not as heartbreaking, something sharper. The snapping of whatever tether had kept his rage contained. He stopped recording and sat on a nearby bench, his hands shaking. He wanted to confront them right there, to walk over and demand answers. But the cop in him said no, not yet, not here. You need more. They eventually walked back toward the hotel, still talking, still comfortable in each other's space. Marcus followed at a distance. They returned to the conference, disappearing into an afternoon session. Marcus went back to his room and watched the videos he'd recorded. He watched them 3 times, studying every gesture, every expression. The evidence was circumstantial but damning, an emotional affair at minimum, probably more. At 6:30, unable to sit still any longer, Marcus called Rachel. Sarah's sister answered on the second ring, her voice cheerful. "Hey Marcus, what's up? I need you to come to Seattle," he said. His voice sounded strange to his own ears, tight and controlled. "Tonight if you can." "Seattle? Why? Is Sarah okay?" "Sarah's fine. I'm here too. I just need someone here. Please, I can't explain over the phone." Rachel was quiet for a moment. Marcus could hear her television in the background, some cooking show. "You're scaring me," she said. "What's going on?" "I think Sarah's having an affair. I followed her here. I've been watching. I need you to see what I'm seeing. I need someone to tell me I'm not crazy." Another pause. Longer this time. "Marcus, this doesn't sound healthy. Maybe you should come home. Talk to your therapist." "Rachel, please." His voice broke slightly. "I've been a good husband to your sister. I've supported her, protected her. And she's here with another man. I just need someone on my side, just for tonight. Please." Rachel sighed. Marcus could hear the conflict in that sound. "Okay," she said finally. "I'll drive up. But Marcus, we're going to handle this calmly. No confrontations, no drama. We'll figure out what's happening and deal with it like adults. Promise me." "I promise," Marcus lied. Rachel arrived at the hotel just before midnight. Marcus met her in the lobby, and she immediately saw something off in his expression. His eyes were too bright, his movements too controlled. She knew this version of Marcus, had seen it at family dinners when he'd been drinking too much and holding on to his composure by force of will. "Show me what you found," she said quietly. They went to his room, and Marcus showed her everything. The photos from the restaurant, the videos from the waterfront, the way David had touched Sarah's face. Rachel watched in silence, her expression unreadable. When the videos ended, she set down his phone and looked at him. "Okay," she said. "This looks bad. I'm not going to tell you it doesn't. But Marcus, even if Sarah is having an affair, you can't just spy on her like this. You need to talk to her, directly. Tomorrow morning, we'll go to her room and have an honest conversation." "What if he's with her right now?" Marcus asked. "Then we'll know for sure." "But Marcus, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that your marriage is over. And that's devastating, I know. But it's not the end of the world. People survive this." Marcus nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. Rachel kicked off her shoes and sat in the armchair, exhausted from the drive. "I'm gonna rest for a bit," she said. "Wake me if anything happens." She fell asleep within minutes. Marcus sat on the edge of the bed, laptop open, watching the hotel security camera feeds. He'd hacked the Wi-Fi earlier using a program he'd learned about during a cybercrime training. The feeds were low quality but functional. He could see the fourth-floor hallway, the elevator bank, the lobby. At 1:47 a.m., Marcus saw David Park exit the elevator on the fourth floor. He walked down the hallway with the confidence of someone who belonged there and stopped at room 447. He knocked quietly. The door opened. Sarah stood there in a robe, her hair loose. They spoke for a moment. David gestured, asking something. Sarah hesitated, then stepped aside. David entered. The door closed. Marcus stared at the screen, watching the timestamp tick forward. 1:50, 1:55, 2 a.m. David didn't leave. Marcus felt his breathing change, shallow and fast, his vision narrowed to the screen, to that closed door, to the betrayal happening behind it. He stood and walked to his bag. He pulled out the Glock, checked the magazine again, chambered around. The mechanical actions were soothing, familiar. Rachel was still asleep in the chair, her head tilted at an uncomfortable angle. Marcus walked over and shook her shoulder. "Rachel, wake up." She stirred, confused, squinting at him in the dim light. "What time is it?" "They're together, right now. Fourth floor, room 447. Rachel saw the gun in his hand and went completely still. "Marcus, put that away, right now." "I just need you to see," he said. "I need you to witness this. So you know I'm not making it up. So everyone knows I had a reason." "A reason for what?" Rachel stood up, her voice sharp with fear. "Marcus, you're not thinking straight. Give me the gun." "He's been in there for half an hour," Marcus said, his voice eerily calm. "They're in bed together, while I'm here. While our marriage still exists, she's breaking every promise we made." Rachel moved toward him, hands out like she was approaching a dangerous animal. "Okay, you're right. You're absolutely right. She's betraying you, and you have every right to be angry. But this isn't how you handle it. You're a cop, Marcus. You know this isn't how you handle it." "I'm not a cop anymore," he said. "I'm just a man whose wife is fucking someone else in a hotel room while I watch on a security camera." He moved toward the door. Rachel grabbed his arm, but he shook her off easily. "Marcus, please. If you love her at all, don't do this. Don't become this person." He looked at her, and Rachel saw something that terrified her. His eyes were empty, like all the warmth had been scooped out and replaced with something mechanical. "I did love her," he said, "more than anything. That's why this hurts so much." He walked out of the room. Rachel followed, whispering urgently, "Marcus, stop, please. Let me go up there. Let me talk to Sarah. Let me handle this. You stay here." But Marcus was already at the elevator, pressing the button. Rachel pulled out her phone, hands shaking, trying to decide who to call. "Hotel security, 911, Sarah?" Before she could dial, the elevator arrived. Marcus stepped inside. Rachel followed, unwilling to let him go alone, terrified of what would happen if she did. They rode to the fourth floor in silence. The hallway was empty, quiet except for the hum of ice machines. Marcus walked straight to room 447. Rachel trailed behind, still pleading. "Marcus, please. Let's just knock. Let's talk to them. There's still time to handle this differently." Marcus pulled a hotel key card from his pocket, one of the universal maintenance cards he'd stolen from a housekeeping cart earlier, another old cop trick, knowing how to access locked spaces. He slid it through the reader. The light turned green. Rachel grabbed his shoulder one last time. "Marcus, if you open that door with that gun, 3 lives are going to be destroyed. Think about what you're about to do. Think about who you're about to become." Marcus looked at her. For just a moment, something flickered in his expression. Doubt. Hesitation. The ghost of the man he used to be. Then it was gone. "I already know who I am," he said. "I'm the man who always finds out the truth." He pushed open the door. And everything that came after happened so fast that Rachel would spend the rest of her life trying to remember the exact sequence, trying to pinpoint the moment when words could have stopped what was already in motion. The room was dim, lit only by the glow of a bedside lamp. Sarah and David were asleep, tangled in white sheets, their clothes scattered across the floor like evidence. The door swung open and they woke in stages, confusion first, then recognition, then terror. Sarah saw Marcus standing in the doorway, gun raised, and the sound that came out of her throat was barely human. David jerked upright, his hands instinctively going up, his voice cracking. "Wait, wait, just wait." Marcus stepped fully into the room. His movements were controlled, precise, the muscle memory of 1,000 entries into dangerous spaces. He'd cleared rooms in drug houses, in domestic violence calls, in active shooter situations. This was no different. Assess the threat, control the space, neutralize the danger. Except the people in front of him weren't criminals. They were his wife and her lover, and the danger was him. Marcus, please. Sarah's voice was high and desperate, her hands clutching the sheet to her chest. Let me explain. Please just let me explain. How long? Marcus asked. His voice was calm, almost conversational. That calmness was the most terrifying thing in the room. David started to stand, still trying to reason his way out. Listen, I know how this looks, but we can talk about this. We're all adults here. Nobody needs to get hurt. The first shot hit David in the chest before he finished the sentence. The sound was massive in the small room, a physical force that seemed to compress the air. David fell backward onto the bed, his hands clutching at the wound, his mouth opening and closing like he was trying to remember how to breathe. Blood spread across the white sheets in a bloom of red. Sarah screamed. Not words, just sound, raw and primal. She scrambled backward against the headboard, her eyes locked on Marcus, seeing him and not seeing him at the same time. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening. This was Marcus, her husband, the man who brought her coffee in bed, who cried at movies, who'd promised to protect her. Rachel burst into the room, her hands grabbing at Marcus's arm. Oh God, Marcus, what did you do? What did you do? Marcus turned towards Sarah, the gun still raised. His finger was on the trigger. Sarah pressed herself against the headboard, as if she could push through it into some other reality where this wasn't happening. Marcus, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Please don't. Please. You promised, Marcus said quietly. 8 years ago, you promised. In front of everyone we know, you promised to be faithful, to honor our marriage, and you're here with him, while I'm 200 miles away, thinking you're at a work conference, thinking you're mine. I am yours, Sarah sobbed. I made a mistake. I'm so sorry. Please, Marcus, please put the gun down. We can fix this. We can go to therapy. We can fix this. Behind David, blood was still spreading. His breathing had become a wet, rattling sound. He tried to speak, but only managed a gurgling noise. Rachel was crying, pulling at Marcus, begging. Marcus, you need to stop. You need to stop right now. Put the gun down, please. You're not this person. This isn't who you are. But Marcus wasn't listening. He was watching Sarah, watching her cry, watching her beg, and some distant part of him was satisfied by it. She was finally showing him the truth. The mask had fallen away. She was scared of him. She understood what she'd done. He fired twice. The first bullet hit Sarah in the chest, just below her collarbone. The second hit her in the abdomen. She made a sound like all the air had been punched out of her lungs and collapsed sideways on the bed, her hand reaching toward David as if they could save each other. Her eyes stayed open, staring at Marcus with something that looked like disbelief. Rachel screamed and ran toward Sarah, trying to stop the bleeding with her hands, pressing down on the wounds. Blood poured between her fingers, hot and slick. Sarah, no, 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 stay with me. Sarah, please. Marcus stood in the center of the room, the gun still in his hand, watching. He felt nothing. The rage that had driven him here had evaporated the moment he pulled the trigger, replaced by a vast emptiness. He looked at Sarah's face, at her eyes that were starting to lose focus, and tried to feel something. Regret, grief, satisfaction, anything. But there was only static. Rachel looked up at him, her face streaked with tears and blood. Call 911. Marcus, please. Call an ambulance. They're dying. We can still save them. Marcus turned toward the door. He needed to leave. He needed to get out of this room, away from what he'd done. But Rachel was in his way now, blocking his path, her hands covered in her sister's blood. Marcus, call for help. Please, don't let them die like this. Rachel, move. His voice was flat, mechanical. No, I'm not moving. You need to call 911 right now. Something clicked in Marcus's brain, a terrible logic that made sense in the moment but would horrify him later. Rachel was a witness, the only witness. She'd seen everything, could testify to everything. His cop training kicked in, the part of him that knew how crime scenes worked, how investigations unfolded. No witnesses meant no testimony. No testimony meant reasonable doubt. Rachel saw the shift in his expression and understood. Her eyes went wide. Marcus, no. I'm family. I'm Sarah's sister. You love me. Marcus, please. I'm sorry, he said. And he was. Sorry that she'd come to Seattle. Sorry that she followed him upstairs. Sorry that she'd become part of this. But sorry wasn't enough to change what happened next. Rachel turned and ran for the door. She almost made it. Her hand was on the doorknob when the shot hit her in the back, between her shoulder blades. She fell forward into the hallway, her body half in the room and half out, the door propped open by her legs. The hallway erupted in chaos. Doors flew open up and down the corridor. People emerged in pajamas and robes, some shouting, some screaming, some just standing frozen in shock. A woman at the end of the hall had her phone out, was yelling into it. Shots fired, 4th floor, someone's been shot, send police, oh God, send everyone. Marcus stood in the doorway and looked at Rachel's body, at the blood pooling beneath her, at Sarah and David on the bed behind him, motionless now, their blood mixing on sheets that would be photographed and cataloged and presented as evidence. He looked at the gun in his hand, still warm from firing. And then finally he felt something. Not regret, not horror, just exhaustion. A bone-deep weariness that made him want to lie down and never get up. He'd spent 15 years as a cop, putting away murderers and rapists and people who hurt others for pleasure or profit. He'd been good at his job, he'd been proud of it. And now he was standing in a hotel room with 3 bodies, holding a smoking gun, with a dozen witnesses watching from the hallway. He'd become the very thing he used to hunt. Marcus walked backward into the room and sat on the floor, his back against the wall. He set the gun on the carpet beside him, hands away from it, palms up. The universal gesture of surrender. He could hear sirens already, multiple vehicles converging on the hotel. Seattle PD response time was under 4 minutes for shots-fired calls. He'd timed it once during a ride-along years ago. He thought about Sarah, about the first time they met at that 4th of July barbecue where she'd been wearing a yellow sundress and laughing at her friend's terrible jokes. About their wedding, a small ceremony in her parents' backyard with paper lanterns and too much champagne. About the morning 2 months ago when he'd woken up and found her crying in the bathroom, and when he'd asked what was wrong, she'd said, "I don't know if I love you anymore." He'd convinced her it was just a phase, that all marriages went through rough patches. But he'd known, even then, that something fundamental had broken between them. He thought about David Park, who was probably a decent guy with his own life and his own story. Maybe he genuinely loved Sarah. Maybe he'd told himself it was real, that this wasn't just an affair but something meaningful. Marcus would never know. He'd made sure of that. And he thought about Rachel, who'd driven 3 hours in the middle of the night because her brother-in-law had asked for help, who'd tried to stop this, who'd begged and pleaded and physically tried to hold him back, who died for the crime of being in the wrong place at the worst possible time. The hotel room door burst open, and Seattle PD flooded in. 5 officers with weapons drawn, shouting commands. "Hands up. Don't move. Show me your hands." Marcus complied immediately, his police training making him the perfect suspect. He knew exactly what they needed from him. He interlaced his fingers behind his head, crossed his ankles, stayed perfectly still while they approached. They zip-tied his wrists and pulled him to his feet, patting him down, checking for additional weapons. One officer kicked the gun away from where Marcus had left it. Another was calling for medics, though it was obvious from the doorway that they were too late. The lead detective, a woman in her 40s with gray-streaked hair, stood in front of Marcus and studied his face. "Marcus Chen," she said, reading his name off his driver's license. "Says here you're former Portland PD. That true?" "Yes, ma'am," Marcus said. His voice was steady, almost professional. 18 years, retired last year. Detective, Homicide Division. She shook her head slowly. "And now you're a triple homicide suspect. What the hell happened here?" "I caught my wife cheating," Marcus said simply. "I shot her, I shot him, and I shot her sister because she witnessed it." The detective looked at him like he was speaking a foreign language. "You're confessing? Just like that? No lawyer, no Miranda rights? You just confessing?" "Yes, ma'am. I know my rights. I'm waiving them. I did what I did. There's no point pretending otherwise." They walked him out through the hallway, through the crowd of hotel guests pressed against the walls, filming on their phones, whispering to each other. Marcus kept his eyes forward, his expression blank. He'd arrested enough people to know how this worked. The perp walk, the media circus, the public condemnation. He'd been on the other side of it so many times. Outside, the hotel parking lot looked like a crime scene from a movie. Police cars, ambulances, fire trucks, all with lights flashing. News vans were already arriving, reporters doing stand-ups with the hotel in the background. Marcus was placed in the back of a patrol car, and as they pulled away, he turned to look at the building one last time. 4th floor, 6 windows from the left. That's where his life had ended, where 3 other lives had ended, where he'd stopped being Marcus Chen, devoted husband and decorated detective, and become something else entirely. The interrogation lasted 6 hours. Marcus told them everything. The emails he'd found, the surveillance, the drive to Seattle, Rachel's arrival, the hotel room. He described it all in the flat, detailed language of a police report. The detectives looked increasingly uncomfortable as he spoke, like they were interviewing a colleague who'd lost his mind, which Marcus supposed they were. They charged him with 3 counts of first-degree murder. Premeditation was obvious. He'd brought a gun, tracked his wife, waited for the opportunity. The prosecution would argue he'd planned this from the moment he found those emails. The defense would argue temporary insanity, PTSD, crime of passion. But Marcus knew the truth. He'd made a choice, multiple choices, and now he'd live with the consequences. The trial took 4 months to reach court. Marcus's lawyer, a public defender named Sharon who looked exhausted before they even started, tried to build a case around his mental state. PTSD from the shooting, paranoid delusions, a man pushed beyond his breaking point. They brought in expert witnesses, psychologists who testified about trauma and hypervigilance and the way combat stress rewires the brain. But the prosecution had security footage of Marcus hacking the hotel Wi-Fi. They had the maintenance key card he'd stolen. They had witnesses who'd seen him following Sarah and David that Saturday. And most damaging, they had his own confession, given clearly and calmly, with full knowledge of his rights. This wasn't a man who'd snapped in a moment of passion. This was a man who'd methodically planned and executed 3 murders. The jury deliberated for 8 hours. Guilty on all counts. First-degree murder, 3 counts. Life without possibility of parole. At sentencing, the judge asked if Marcus had anything to say. He stood, wearing an orange jumpsuit that was 2 sizes too big, and looked at Sarah's parents in the gallery. They were holding each other, their faces ravaged by grief. Rachel's boyfriend was there too, a guy Marcus had met twice at family dinners. He was staring at Marcus with pure hatred. "I'm sorry," Marcus said. "I know that doesn't mean anything. I know it doesn't bring them back. But I am sorry, not for what I felt, but for what I did with those feelings. I had options. I could have filed for divorce. I could have walked away. I could have chosen my pain over their lives, and I didn't. That's on me. That's nobody's fault but mine." Sarah's father stood up, his voice shaking with rage. "You murdered my daughters, both of them. Sarah didn't deserve to die for making a mistake. And Rachel, she was trying to help you. She died because she cared about you, and you killed her anyway." Marcus nodded. "I know, you're right. I know." The judge sentenced him to 3 consecutive life terms. Marcus would die in prison. There was no ambiguity about that. He was 43 years old. He'd spend the next 40 years in a cell if he lived that long. Most cops didn't survive long in general population. Other inmates had their own sense of justice. In prison, Marcus wrote letters to Sarah's parents, to Rachel's boyfriend, to David Park's family, who he'd never met. He wrote the same things over and over. "I'm sorry. I was wrong. There's no excuse." Most of the letters were never answered. A few came back marked "Returned to sender." One of David's siblings wrote back a brief note that said, "We don't forgive you. We never will. But we want you to know that David was a good man. He was kind and funny, and he deserved to live. You took that away from all of us." Marcus kept that letter. He read it every day, a penance of his own making. Years passed. Marcus aged badly in prison, his hair going completely white, his body shrinking. He had a heart attack at 51 and survived. He was jumped twice by inmates who recognized him as a cop. He survived that too. Some days he wished he hadn't. A podcast producer contacted him 7 years into his sentence, wanting to do an episode about the case. Marcus agreed, hoping maybe speaking about it would help someone else make a different choice. During the interview, the producer asked what he remembered most about that night. Marcus thought for a long time. The look on Rachel's face when she realized I was going to shoot her. She'd been begging me to stop, to think about what I was doing, and then her expression changed. She wasn't scared anymore. She was just sad, disappointed, like I'd let her down in some fundamental way. That's what I see when I close my eyes. Not Sarah. Not David. Rachel's disappointment. The producer asked if he felt the punishment fit the crime. "It doesn't matter what I feel," Marcus said. 3 people are dead. Their families will never recover. I destroyed entire futures, not just theirs, but everyone who loved them. There's no punishment big enough for that. Life in prison is what the law says I deserve. But the real punishment is waking up every day knowing I can never undo what I did. That's the sentence I'll serve until I die. The podcast aired to a small audience. Most people had forgotten about the case by then. It had been one tragedy among thousands, lost in the constant stream of violence and heartbreak that filled the news. But Sarah's mother heard it. She wrote Marcus a letter afterward, the first communication he'd received from her family in 7 years. "I listened to your interview," she wrote. "You sounded sincere. Maybe you are. But sincerity doesn't bring back my daughters. Every morning I wake up and remember they're gone. Every holiday, every birthday, there are 2 empty chairs at our table. You took that from us. You took everything. I don't forgive you. I never will. But I wanted you to know that Sarah was more than your wife. She was our daughter. She was Rachel's sister. She was a person with dreams and fears and a whole life that didn't revolve around you. And you reduced her to a moment of betrayal. That's what I can't forgive. Not the killing, though that's unforgivable too, but the way you made her death about you, about your pain, about your jealousy. She deserved better than that. She deserved better than you." Marcus read the letter a dozen times. Then he put it with the others in a folder he kept under his bunk. Evidence of what he'd destroyed. Evidence that he'd once been trusted, loved, welcomed into a family. Evidence of the man he used to be and the monster he'd become. In interviews, people always asked the same question. Did he regret it? And Marcus always gave the same answer. Every second of every day. But regret doesn't matter. What matters is that I made a choice. I chose violence over vulnerability. I chose my ego over 3 human lives. And that choice is permanent. There's no taking it back. There's no redemption arc. There's just the rest of my life, living with what I did. On the 10th anniversary of the murders, a detective who'd worked the case was interviewed for a true crime documentary. He was asked what stayed with him about that night. He said, "The look on his face when we arrested him. He was calm, almost relieved, like he'd just finished a job. That's what scared me most. He'd been a cop for 15 years, knew exactly what he was doing, knew exactly what the consequences would be. And he did it anyway, because in his mind, he wasn't committing murder. He was serving justice." That's the moment I understood. The most dangerous person in the world isn't someone who doesn't know right from wrong. It's someone who believes they're the only one who does. The documentary ended with footage of the hotel, still standing, still operating. Room 447 had been renovated, the bloodstains scrubbed away, the carpet replaced. Guests stayed there now, unaware of what had happened within those walls. Life had moved on. The world had moved on. Everyone except the people who'd loved Sarah and Rachel and David. For them, time had stopped in that hotel room on that terrible night when a man decided his pain mattered more than their lives. And in a prison cell 3 states away, Marcus Chen sat on his bunk and stared at the ceiling, counting down the years until his own death would finally end the sentence he was serving. Not the one handed down by the judge, the one he'd given himself. The knowledge that he'd once been someone worth loving and had destroyed that person along with everyone else. He had spent his career in service of the law, but when his personal world crumbled, the law meant nothing. And 3 people paid for his certainty with their lives. The badge couldn't save him from himself, and nothing could save the women he killed from the man who once promised to protect them.